maybe about half an hour. So, disclaimer.
Camera, just look, take it.
Let's take a
It's
look.
cutting off your head.
With good eyes, eh?
Just stand there,
Thank you.
I'll adjust it.
So, yep, my opinions, don't blame my employer. Oh, and if you have anything like corrections, or if you want to ask a question or want something clarified, then feel free to ask. It's a good way to learn. We always need people to do presentations, so it's really not that bad. Never had anybody throw a beer bottle at me yet. So. And also organizing, and yeah, thanks to Voss for sponsoring, and it always helps. Okay, we also have some kind of like sister organizations or meetups and groups. So we've got Xerox Coffee in Cape Town. This will be on the second Saturday, so the next one's on 10th September. We had the last one just this Saturday past. That's a group of guys getting together, talking about information security and cool stuff. So, the presentation is actually about cybercrime. So we talk about categories. I'm not really a big fan of categories and thinking about different ways to chop things up. Sometimes interesting, mostly not. Then we're going to go into a whole bunch of different types of cybercrime, which is probably more interesting. Touch on the law a bit, and then I'm going to think about and ask some questions, answer some questions about detecting cybercrime, preventing cybercrime. And the etc. bit is everything else I was talking about at the beginning. So, examples, real world examples, war stories, that kind of thing. So, to start off with very basic cybercrime. So, it's either directed at computers. So, if you're hacking into computers, or you're trespassing on the computer, or you're stealing service, that's directed at the computer. Or it's another type of crime which is committed with the computer. So, whether it's extortion or fraud, but using a computer, then that's also considered cybercrime. So if we're talking about cybercrime, we're going to talk about what is a crime. So basically it's something that goes against the law. So, hey, howdy. So conduct, which, sit down. And and basically it's punishable by the state. So if you do something bad, it's not like a bylaw where you're going to get a little fine from it, or like stop doing that, stop your dog barking. It's like, oh, you steal something from somebody and you can be prosecuted for that, and the court finds you guilty, then you can be punished for it, and basically only the state can decide, like, okay, you have or haven't done this, i.e. the judges. So one of the themes that we've had before is forensics, and that's the collection of colleagues, yeah? So the collection of evidence to be presented in court, and that's forensics. So I want you guys just to think about this. I'm not going to like harp on this a lot, but if you think about when we're talking about a type of cybercrime, we're talking about detecting a cybercrime, preventing a cybercrime, maybe think about what are the sources of evidence, what is available, what can be collected, how could be lost. So just keep that one in mind. So a few of the cybercrimes directly at computers. So cracking, which the press in general likes to call hacking. So that's actually getting into somebody's computer that you don't have access to. So if you're busy trying, not you, somebody is busy trying password after password and brute forcing their way in there, then they're not supposed to be on that system. So they're actually committing a cybercrime. Denial of service, DOS, DDoS, again, if you,
Sorry, just on the brute force.
Yep.
Is it the attempt that is the crime, or is it only once you gain access?
If you gain access, it's definitely.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about that one. I think the attempt. I mean, okay. Well, we've got a fairly good answer for this. I can't give you. I'm not a lawyer, but I like to make analogs between the digital and the real world. So if you're attempting to break into somebody's house and you're busy jamming the door and you don't quite get it open, it's not a good thing when the cops rock up and catch you doing that, right? So, yeah, I'd preferably not like to be in that situation. So that's kind of an indication that somebody's going to throw the book at you or try. You might not actually end up in prison for that, but probably just because you haven't really done anything and caused damages, etc.
Well, it's hard to show or prove that you were trying to do something.
Yeah, so I mean, you might have intent there, because they might not show like you were trying to get in, but like, were you really? Like, I don't know, I get confused sometimes, and I thought that was the site that I was supposed to have an account to log into. So, how good's your lawyer? It's other factors.
If certain laws get passed, they'll probably get convicted on the tools.
Yeah.
of doing it.
So one of the he's right, and we're going to touch on the law in a bit. And basically, for any of these that I was speaking about, and any other crime that you guys want to suggest, and then we can discuss that in a bit more detail, or ask some questions about like what is the law, like the cybercrime bill, say, which is the law, but that we're going to talk about. Note that's the proposed cybercrime bill; it's not actually in effect yet. But yeah. So theft of service. So if you're stealing Netflix or something, I don't know how you guys do these things, but you see spam, it's kind of not really thought of as a crime, but if you're the ISP or somebody paying for bandwidth, then you definitely are out of pocket. Probably not normally a criminal case, probably a civil case if you had to, so again, not really a crime then. Malware, so lots of different types of malware. So you've got adware and you've got spyware and you've got ransomware, and ransomware is like the new cool kid on the block, and definitely probably the worst one to get, because there go all your files, and anybody who's ever lost a computer system knows that the most important files on their computer were the ones that you created that are your data, not the operating system or the application, but you can just download and reinstall. Even the configuration, we can reconfigure it, and we've probably got some idea of what the host name is and what the IP address was from DNS, etc. And we know what user accounts on there. But if you've lost the database that was on there, or if you're a lawyer and you've got a whole bunch of cases that you're working on, they're only on your computer, and voila, now the originals have been deleted, and the unencrypted originals have been deleted, and you're only left with the encrypted ones, then you've got a problem. We can talk about ransomware a bit more. So we do them in reverse order, because ransomware is the interesting one. I was just speaking about that. And the problem with ransomware is often you apply for the key and you want to pay the money, and guess what? No, don't have it. So there's no actual way to decrypt your data. So, and we are going to get onto in a second preventing, detecting. So any of these that you want to ask about, just if I don't tackle them specifically, then just put your hand up and say, like, how would you detect or prevent, or sometimes you can't, but you can at least ameliorate. So for example, ransomware, I'd really like backups that are not on the same computer. So if they're offline, like unplugged on a hard drive, or written off a tape, or whatever mechanism you use, or burnt to CD or DVD, then that's good, because, I got some ransomware on my computer and now I'm locked out. If I go to last week's backup, I can just wipe the computer and get things back. If you don't have a backup and that's the only copy, then you've got basically three choices, and one is recreate all your work, which is going to really be time consuming and expensive. Two, pay and hope that they give you the keys and can actually recover your stuff. And three is try and break the encryption that they've used, and that has actually been fairly successful for, at least at some points, certain versions of malware. I'll get to in a second. And they've either misimplemented the algorithm or they've chosen weak encryption, and people have managed to get their files back like that.
I can't remember the name, but there's an organisation in Europe at the moment that's amalgamating, so we're trying to bring together a lot of different groups to stop ransomware by providing keys. And so you go, I can't look up the name just now, I'll let somebody else remember it. But basically, if you go to the site, they've got a whole lot of information on ransomware and different types of ransomware, and if you're lucky, they've got the keys and how you can run it. And if not, they will try and actually resolve them, basically to make ransomware not pay. And they're hoping to break it that way because it's just so profitable for them.
Well, people get desperate, right? When their life's work or the book that they've been writing is suddenly gone, and there's a note saying like, hey, pay us X amount to get your stuff back, then a lot of people will pay. So, and what you're raising an interesting point, which I know somebody else sitting behind you also likes to talk about, is the money that's available from cybercrime. So if you make it unprofitable, then, well, what's the point then? Like, is somebody going to spend their own time, their own money, trying to commit a crime to enrich themselves if it's going to cost them more than they're going to make? Not really, because that's like running a business at a loss. So this doesn't make any sense. A think I might have come across the same site or a similar site, and it was basically a lot of information. I don't think it was quite the same site. It was,
They've got various sections, and one of the sections is basically what kind of ransomware is it that we can detect it with. And as I say, they've got quite a few that they've actually said, yeah, we can get around this, and we've got tools that you can download and recovery data.
so the one site that I was looking at was tools, etc. The only part I don't remember is them providing keys. So it might have been a different site, or it might have been the same site, and just further back before they did that, or I missed that section. But yeah.
They're basically they're saying, yeah, we can get your data back, and these ones not yet, and actually trying to protect yourself as well. I think it's a problem for. I think a lot of governments are behind it because it's a problem basically.
Yes.
If all of your companies are losing money, your economy would have to be.
Going to a website and downloading an application to try and break encryption, probably less sophisticated site.
But this is a very
No, I'm saying,
yeah.
Going to try and break mention encryption by downloading another application, I think it's not.
Also not going to adopt anyone who is much but just to add to that, often what they do is that they give you a sample to show that they can actually encrypt files, and what they tend to do is look at somehow they look at those files to look at how they encrypted it and try to figure out how to do the rest.
Try to reverse engineer.
Been successful so far, but even more successful than Kathy and everyone trying to, Kaspersky trying to decrypt everything is a developer who finds how that people can actually decrypt the stuff and then just add to the obfuscation.
Yeah. I mean, some of the techniques that I've read is, so you end up with a piece of malware and it encrypts your data. So then it wants to, what it really wants you to do is go and pay somebody anonymously, Bitcoin or some other mechanism, and then get like a key that you can load. You're talking to a website. So this piece of software then needs to have a key put into it. It needs to be able to recognize the key and then go like, yes, okay, that's the right key, and then decrypt your the contents of your hard drive. So what people have actually done, they've gone and looked inside the binary and searched through it and reverse engineered that and found keys embedded in it. Like, that's just really silly of the person who created that piece of ransomware. It's not good cryptographic practice to include your keys inside your program. It's like they're a bit vulnerable there. So sometimes pulling them out of RAM, etc. But yeah.
Otherwise known as big threats.
Yeah. Yeah, so move on, because otherwise we're not going to get out of here today. So spyware, looking more at the user, so tracking what you're looking at, maybe kind of boring. Maybe it's starting to see what sites, what you type into your keyboard when you're visiting your banking sites. Maybe a little bit more worrying at that point. So yeah, I kind of rate spyware somewhere in the middle. Adware to me is more of an annoyance. Somebody's making money of it, again, just to go back to the other point from the ransomware. So all these things, somebody's making money out of it. So somebody's selling your details, like, oh, what websites you visit. So I'm guessing some marketers are paying for some aggregated data somewhere that did not come from Google or Facebook or one of the other people, or large companies that basically effectively tracks you and spies on you. Independent operations. So back to, or rather changing to crimes just using a computer. Crimes that if you didn't have a computer you could still commit just without the computer. So normal bullying becomes cyberbullying, and identity theft can be done without a computer and can also be done with a computer. And child pornography does not require a computer. Like, I'm pretty sure there was child pornography well before there were computers. Obviously, the thing about computers, and especially digital, and the internet, now you've got a worldwide market for these things, and you also have distribution. So it makes distributing child pornography or any file, or for that matter, much easier. So I think identity theft is kind of an interesting one, and basically assuming somebody's identity. We're going to touch on this a bit later under the social engineering side of things. So if there's any questions, or maybe anybody else has got an example of a different kind of crime that you could commit using a computer. Open to the floor. Anyone?
What about this new Pipcoin? Have you seen Pipcoin?
No?
It's basically a Ponzi scheme that Arnold after the big and basically this is a guy that's telling people that they can get rich quickly. And just go and search for Bitcoin, and it's hailed as a African blockchain cryptocurrency. But he's done some research. He's using the guy from Ripple, David Schwartz, as the crypto brain behind it. But if you just look at it, it's really a poor attempt. But he's making some money. He's definitely stealing money, and I mean that per se is not necessarily a direct crime until he's proven to be Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
But he's managed to swindle a lot of people out of it. It's just a classic Ponzi scheme. And the way he's done it is quite interesting. Basically just setting up websites and making it look legit. But when you dig this, you quickly see through it. But the people he's targeting are uneducated people. Normally the stock fellas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's how he's swindling people over.
So basically just
Fraud.
it's fraud, and he's basically promising superior returns, and he's kind of hooking his whatever little train onto the Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies that people have heard about.
Playing those words, yeah.
Yeah, using the words to bamboozle people, and yeah, taking their money and paying it out to somebody else until it all comes tumbling down when there's not enough people to sustain the robbing Peter to pay Paul principle. So from the proposed cybercrime bill, we've got quite a few more examples of cybercrimes. So unlawful securing of access. So if you gain access, well, if you work, I suppose, to gain access to files or systems that you shouldn't have access to, that's a crime. So pretty broad. Protected data. So if you're looking at data that you shouldn't be doing, more sensitive data, financial, for example, then that becomes a crime in and of itself. Unlawful acts in respect of software or hardware tools. One of my favorites. If you have the tools that could be used to hack, then you either need to explain why you have them and have a good reason, which is kind of saying you're guilty until you prove you're innocent, which is really bad. Again, I would stress that this is the proposed cybercrime bill, and there's a lot of comment going on and backwards and forwards, and the bill is changing, so hopefully that can be removed. But merely having tools that could be used to, sniff data, for example. And I don't know about you, but if anybody's ever looked after a network or tried to debug something on a network, one of the first things you do is sniff the traffic on the network to see what is actually happening and why is this traffic not getting from A to B, because that's what network does. It moves data from one point to another point. So not maybe the best thought out piece of paragraph in there. Interference with data as computer programs. So you're not supposed to be interfering, and I suppose that'd be like DDoS could fall under there, and just about anything could fall under interference. It's a bit broad. Then again, the same thing just with storage mediums or computer systems. So again, very broad terms. If you're fiddling with something you don't want you to be fiddling with, there's a law against it. Well, this law, not actual law yet, I should say. This is really, the first one here is about just gaining access codes or passwords. So you're not supposed to be in a possession of like a password or a passphrase or a PIN number, that you shouldn't have access to. That just becomes a crime in and of itself. So, and then here they start going like, well, no, we do, we've got laws for fraud, but when you're using a computer, it's a different crime, which to me is a bit silly and redundant. Not quite sure why they think that cyber fraud is not fraud unless they have a specific piece of legislation against it. Same with cyber forgery and uttery, cyber extortion. To me, these are all like, well, extortion is illegal, then cyber extortion should be illegal. And if it's not, then go fix that law. So some comments have been made to that effect, so we'll see if that works. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. Harmful communications, so basically, I suppose hate speech. It's what they were going for. It's been a bit of taking it back out, more in terms of defense of speech, because what one person finds to be hate speech, another person doesn't, and if it's not hate speech, if it's just harmful, if somebody wants to say they're upset, in fact, at least one of the versions was saying, again, this is under, review and it's changing, but if I say something and it's intended to cause harm, well, now or offence. What offends one person doesn't offend another person, and how do you show intent? And yeah, I don't know why. So that about sums up my thoughts on that.
Let's go back to the last one. That's on that point.
Yep.
So we've got laws to cover most of these.
Well, that's the other thing. There's a lot of overlap. So it's
So the law that prevents us from having certain tools, which a lot of us would generally have. I can see, I'm guessing it was written by someone who wrote the law because of the analogy. If I'm carrying a lockpick set and I'm not a locksmith,
yes.
You're probably up to something. But the same does not apply for IT workers because it's just not the same environment.
Well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think trying to think of a really good example now of why not. Basically, if anybody here has not worked in IT and you're actually working as a sysadmin or a network engineer or network administrator, or if you're working as a developer, then you are pulling things apart all day, every day, looking for problems, fixing problems, diagnosing problems, and tools to diagnose these things entails taking them apart and looking at what puts them together. Like normally you own these systems, but what happens if you're trying to make your system talk to your supplier system? Okay, now technically your supplier has got an agreement with you to say that yes, you can interface with them and therefore it's not working, you're debugging. You've got a really nice reason to say that you're doing it. If you're, I don't know, say a student at university and you're curious about things and now you're looking at why does this application server behave in a certain way, or does it have any security flaws, I'm not sure if that's going to be a good enough reason under this kind of law. So without really trying to break in there, without actually causing any damage, without even trying to steal anything, without doing anything like that, it can become a crime. It's like, it's maybe a little too far, but again, I'm not a lawyer, just my take on things. So maybe one of the more useful, maybe not quite concrete, because it's a very broad and cybercrime, lots of different types of cybercrime. So this is going to be a bit of a theme going forward. So detecting cybercrime. So start thinking about how you would detect cybercrime. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of cybercrimes at you. We're going to go through them in more detail, including some real-world examples. I think monitoring would be part of that. So if you're looking at what's happening to your network or to your computer, whether you run a network as an ISP, whether you have a website. If you have a website and it's got logs, you can look at those logs. You can have a tool pause them and say like, oh, you had so many attempts to log into my admin console coming from, wait, that IP is in Japan. Like, I'm not in Japan, that's probably a problem. So if you're not looking at it though, it's problematic. If you want to think about evidence, which I spoke about at the beginning, if evidence was ever needed to go to court, if you're not retaining those log files, well, you're not going to have any evidence. If your logging level is not correct, you're not going to have any evidence, etc., etc. If somebody does break in, and you just go format machine and spin up a new virtual instance if it's in the cloud, which is just a virtual machine, and well, it's gone, right? If you were to shut it down and spin up a new one, and then disable all its network access, and then mount it on just as a file system, then you could probably go through it and go like, oh, I see they installed this piece of software, etc., and this is how they got in, and this was the flaw they used, etc. You might actually be able to collect some evidence. So just things to bear in mind. So if you are trying to break into these systems, and not you again, this is like if somebody out there is trying to break into somebody else's system, one of the things you're going to do is think about, well, what is the other guy going to do to detect whether I'm breaking in or prevent me breaking in or collect evidence that I'm doing that. So the guys start getting more stealthy. So you get people who will scan every port on the system and the warning bells go off. You get other guys who are like, oh, okay, we've detected a system. Then they'll back off. Then they'll come back very gently in like one request. And then, so more how the professionals do it, because otherwise you're going to tip off the person that you're trying to surveil, especially if you're the NSA or any large organization. So this kind of strikes a bit of an arms race though. Like how do you defend a system? So you look for problems. Problems are like symptoms, where somebody's like trying to like get into the system. Okay, cool, great. There's a whole lot of entries in my logs, and they all come at the same time. They all come from this IP address. So what happens when there's one attempt, and then there's another attempt, but it comes from a different IP in a different country, and and days are going past between each attempt. Are you going to pick this up? Maybe, maybe not. It gets much harder. So then you'll get tools that will visualize what's going in your log files. So you can just say, like, show me all the unsuccessful login attempts and which accounts that you tried to access and the times and the IP addresses. So that makes it a bit easier than to spot it. So it's, as you see, it's a bit of an arms race going on. So, interesting stuff. Anybody here have any ideas or thoughts on detecting any type of cybercrime? Like maybe you've detected cybercrime in your organization, or an attempt at fraud or theft or unauthorized access. Yep.
You can make a system that has no authorized access, and any attempts on it is unauthorized.
Yeah, I like that. Might have done that. Yep, honeypots, intrusion detection systems. Yeah, the IDS and the honeypot are very, very similar. Like kind of like that. And if you were to do a Venn diagram. And honeypot is more like collecting information, seeing who accesses and where they're coming from. Well, at least that's one of the primary uses or reasons to have a honeypot. And the IDS is to sound the alarm, like detects, and then you have it monitoring and it fires it off. It's great fun when the new IT guy finds that.
You can scan Facebook.
Pastebin. Okay. So what, looking for new attacks or
Disclosure. Someone's done with the data, still selling. Like that,
so basically that's checking to see that, oh look, those files that were mine and private are now on the internet, so I guess I've been hacked. Yeah, well you'll know for sure. It's very reactive, but we'll definitely know at that point.
Just talking about honeypots,
Yep.
Open Canaries got their nice token system. So you match up to the honeypot and it's got a token. And then they breach that, start googling around, but you get a trigger saying like, hey, this guy's screwed your account for this, and you know.
So the nice thing about Open Canary, traditionally our honeypots, like looking at a whole server, right? So am I being scanned? Is someone traversing through the directory? Open Canary actually does it a bit more like granular, so you can actually embed a URL, whatever. You can embed something in a file in a database table. You can even set up your LinkedIn account with the API to fire off. So most IDS is like just get all the data where the point of Open Canary is something happening right now that you should know about. Like, should you be shutting stuff down?
Yep. Well, it's definitely an intrusion detection system, so, and it works. So it's pretty cool. Talk about prevention. So, what about preventing cybercrime? Maybe think about what are the attack vectors. Maybe reverse the order of the questions on the board might make it a little bit easier. So, consider an attack vector. How about operating system flaws? It's kind of becoming a bit old hat these days. Looking more at the browsers. If you're talking, end user computing. So if you've got Flash running, like, haha, good luck. You've made somebody very happy on the other side of the equation. So you've got people in your organization. You've got, various business processes, etc. So somebody's trying to get in. Like, where would they try to get in? How would you stop them?
Web applications, SQL injections, cross-site scripting, cross-site scripts, forgery,
Yep.
anything that's public facing that touches that's sensitive.
So you're talking about things like the attack surface now, which is obviously there's vectors to attack the attack surface. So you're talking about web application servers, and you're talking about publicly available on the internet because you said it's web or available via web access. So that's good points. So you said SQL injection. So the obvious thing is to protect against SQL injection. And if there's cross-site scripting, ensure that you've got protection against. So I mention names, but you're mentioning good points. And if you look out there, there are quite a few guides on this. OWASP has got some guides, like top 10 vulnerabilities, that kind of thing. There are various, like SANS, I think they've also got alerts. And so you can patch your systems. It's not a bad idea, just if you're wondering. Just making sure that you code securely, and there are guides on that. Making sure that people can't just put SQL into your web application. It's like why would you want to let somebody pass through SQL, like, I don't know, alter table, or like select star from what? No, don't do that. So sanitize your input. We're not going to go very far away from it, as you can see. It's like you guys don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it.
Actually, you've got people there which
here we go.
I work from this one financial institution, and they didn't have an awful lot of outward-facing access web, that wasn't really the main thing. The people used to do from Viewpoint, and they, on more than one occasion, got research to talk to everybody in the company, and basically our two presentation to when the guy sits with you down the pub, and just chatting with you, maybe offers you DVD, it's not, it's probably still easy. It's fine, it's just fine. They try to get through to the staff that you're the weak point, because with this financial institution, for instance, they know that criminals need to launder money. They like to do that through financial institutions, they're taking policies and things like security checks and whatever. So they need somebody on the inside to recommend. And that's where, it's not necessarily, it's not hacking and getting access to the computer. You need somebody to actually be on the inside and actually set you up. And I think that's still a big part, because, he raise his hands and others to say, goes on to Facebook, finds the details, your sister's Mr. Christie's here. He's got a lot of info very easily, and they don't like that.
So you've seen the next, how many slides?
Yeah.
So, a couple of points there. So technology, okay, so you've got a firewall, yay, and you've locked it down. And there's only 1 or 2 systems that are available on the internet now. Cool. And you've got, an intrusion detection system. Yay, cool. So, great. And you've got backups, and you've got this, and you've got lots of technology. So what's the attacker going to do? They're going to look and go like, oh, well, you never trained any of your staff. They're all very, very helpful to the person who walks in there and starts asking questions with the clipboard and doing a survey, or hi there, or somebody who phones from another office and spoofs the phone number on their phone, the outgoing number. So when the phone's like, oh, it's somebody's phoning from our Johannesburg office. If you're a big corporate, how do you know the thousands of people working in the Johannesburg office? You don't. So when Bob calls from there, I don't know. I'll come back to that one in a bit, because we've got a couple of slides on that. But the point is, wherever the weak point is, you shoring up the technical side of things, and you've got the firewalls, and you've got the antivirus, and you've got all those things. Oh, great, okay. But, if I'm going to be or somebody was going to be dropping, I keep saying I and you, it's pretty bad. I mean that in the royal sense, obviously. If you start dropping these things in the parking lot, and people are picking them up, that's a people issue. They don't have the training they need. They don't recognize the danger. So training people is a very good idea. There's no security training. How is the secretary going to know any better? How is the director going to know any better? Or the C-level executive, for that matter? It's they don't know. If they haven't done security training, they just won't know. Fraudsters and criminals, they prey on ignorance and weakness, and they go for the easiest way, and they're not going to go and try and break the security of the technical system that's been really well configured and locked down and backed up in multiple layers. And why? Just come in, break the physical security of the door, and carry out the servers or something. If you have to, you have to. So, Processes, policies, and procedures is like, if somebody leaves the company, like, is there anybody locking down the accounts when the person leaves? No. Oh, look, people who've left your company for the last 5 years have still got VPN access in. That's really bad when that happens. Somebody should feel really silly about that. It's like very easy to remedy that. Like, when people join, this is the process we go to. We give them all the access. When they leave, this is the access we revoke. You know? Well, that helps. It didn't cost very much. If you're not thinking about these things, then they tend not to happen. So it's kind of like wherever you shine the spotlight and pay attention to, that area gets better. But if you neglect one area, that's the low point, and probably where they're going to come in.
I'll
Yeah.
just say, so my experience, IT department actually is manuals, particularly if it's core change, and it changes stuff randomly, so it doesn't happen. Because if you've got a department which does stuff and they start to run, when the user gets told they have to do such and such, they're expecting it. And if something out of that pattern happens, it will ring bells in certain people's heads.
Yep.
If you've got a disorganized IT department because changes stuff multiplied isn't valid, the user isn't going to know. That's shit. So when somebody rings up and says, you know, can you just open up TV on your machine and just do some work, they're going to go down. Because they don't.
I thought you were going to make a slightly different point, so I'll make that one. Your point is good and valid, so this one's a bit of a sister point. If you look at how the companies are really on the cutting edge of operations and doing that automatically, DevOps, they're doing things like making sure the guys who are looking after the systems basically have the absolute minimum of access for the minimum amount of time needed to make changes to the production systems. And those are the guys you would normally trust, like, oh, here are the root accounts or the system administrator accounts, and Windows administrator. And normally that's like God power on the system, so you don't want to hand that out. You do everything. You mentioned change management or ITIL type concept, but the guys will make all the changes programmatically, and they'll commit this change to the system, which will then go make this configuration change, and that gets reviewed by somebody first. There's checks and balances. So yeah, when it's just unstructured and free for all, who knows who did what then? Like, especially if everybody logs in with the same account, not so good. Yep.
There's one thing that's I've seen it in a couple of talks recently, and then also a WASP covers it sometimes in the like a top 10 is business process. So often corporates like business analysts, and they design the system, but often find security holes in the way it's actually designed the business process. So 2 examples in America. One company lost $50,000 because their coupon system that allowed you to put as many coupons as you like. So this guy just enumerated through the coupon registry until he found all of them and got $50,000 worth of stuff for $200. Another person realized that if you, on a certain site, click order, and then at some point in the ordering process cancel or just close the window, the order still goes through to shipping and ends up at your house. Now,
before paying, I'm guessing.
In terms of the law, these people could not be convicted for a cyber crime or a classic crime because in the US, and often on these websites, these e-commerce sites, they have a statement around the lines because of the law that if it is not your fault, you can deem it as a gift from the site. Because the business process actually allowed for that to happen. It's not a flaw in the technology, it's a flaw in the design. And it's not your fault. But then these people did stuff like post it to a address that did not exist, and the mailman would then pick it up and take it to their house, which then is mail fraud and still get covered with that.
So convicted for a different crime because they were clever enough to not actually commit a crime to get the goods by just following the process and then stopping the process. Well, if you want to send me stuff, then send me. Yeah.
Like no WhatsApp, Burp Suite, Nessus, Qualsys, nothing stands for business process faults. I mean, you don't model the business process before you kick off Qualsys. So,
but there it is, process in the middle. under technology.
I mean, if you're doing something that is money exchange, right?
Yeah.
Like one coupon per sale, that should be like law.
Well, anyway, so basically what you're saying is checks and balances, though.
A quick story that I happened onto a whole lot of information that I shouldn't have access to, just by being a nice person, being helpful. So I recently moved out of a house, and they would have had no line, telecom, they would have had to initiate fees, stuff like that. So I said, you pay me for the month that I've already paid, you'll have it for money and sort it out in the first month. So then he had some difficulties connecting, so I rock up, gives me his Apple passwords. They're all simple, they're his business name. That's his Apple ID password. It was also the same password for his Gmail, all sorts of things. And then it wasn't working on the computer, so I said, anyway, I'm used to working in the UK, we don't actually have to log into the router. So I tried a few of his devices and gave him passwords for all of them. Like, it's the easiest way is people by far.
Actually, you can design a business policy around it.
Yep. We're going to move on to phishing. So phishing is when you send emails to people, and it doesn't have to be an email, but it's a common distribution method of the message or the communication to get the person to start doing things and giving you information, and maybe, I don't know, fix the problem with your bank account by logging in, and you end up feeding your banking account password and your PIN number, etc., and the OTP, etc., that they're sending to you. Well, you're getting it from the bank because they just request the bank to send it on your behalf, and then they get it because you're looking at their web page, which is on the back end feeding it through to the bank site. So, but basically, I mean, how do you prevent something like phishing emails in an organization? Any ideas? Yep.
I like Capitec's policy. They state they will never send you any emails. So any email from Capitec is not from Capitec.
So you're raising a good point there, and you've got to think about the different actors in the system, or the different people, different parties. So one of them is the bank, another one is the bank customer, another one is the criminal. So if the bank is explaining, and to go back to your point earlier about if people know what to expect, if they know to, the banks continue telling them, we will never send you an email, like, and we'll never get you to click on a link. If that ever happens, then somebody knows, this probably isn't right, because my bank keeps telling me they'll never do this. So.
It's very hard, because you can have a situation like one of my clients where they got crypto. They got sent to CV in one form, they figured this is, they were looking for people, that was the right thing, a double click on the exit, on the file, and all of a sudden the machine half their days got this. And that's becoming a huge problem, because you cannot tell. Some of those emails are so plausible, it's very difficult to tell.
Yep.
They saw their efforts out, and they're like, okay, you're looking for this kind of company. I mean, the generic one
Are you reading off my slides now? Or is that just coincidence?
There's the debate that said that because people often ask about those emails and get what's called that, and they say that people really after the money, why do they use like the Amazon? And the reason for that is because the people that are likely to and so they're not after each other in the first place. They're after people that aren't.
It's obvious that there was a talk, I forget which talk, but the guy said it's a numbers game. So if it takes you 6 months to properly learn the English language, or in that 6 months, you can send out another 1 million emails, and at least 100 people respond. The trade-off there is you're going to waste your time improving the quality rather just quantity. Because they never have a good one with terminal.
Well, that crypto part of the business, that crypto was at the moment, the last one that I had to deal with, they were asking for 0.44, which is 3,000. So if you figure out, you not send a whole heap of those, and you get 3 of those, that's like 9,000 rand in a week.
But see, they've gained the system of it, right? In the past, like, maybe you get a widow or a lonely person to send you something, maybe a second line, and then for months you wouldn't find something. Now, you're holding hostage the files. You know, now they're at your line.
I remember reading about exactly things like that background because when you have traditional online scams, you don't want somebody to think about what you're doing because you're wasting their time. So once you actually get a communication from them, you want to know that you're actually not to read English or what you want. I think that was actually the difference in other things. Online you get that multiple communication.
But the worst is, like, for instance, I think it's Locky. It will actually leave you a Microsoft docx file with macros in it. And like the text won't even show up until you enable the macros, which then kick off a whole bunch of stuff, and it's even more own than your report.
Set your standards and
I had a colleague that
How about we add so much functionality to a word document?
But the worst part of it is a lot of the time the guy will open, or the lady will open up the document. This seems to be happening commonly. One of them was in the States, they opened the document. They found the machine was crypto. They were really embarrassed because they didn't open their files. They thought they'd done something wrong, so they felt ashamed. But they didn't say anything until one day, oh, which takes the thing that was way bigger than it actually needed.
yeah. It's an interesting perspective on that, actually. You know, shame, not admitting, and you kind of feel you've done something wrong. You've been a bit foolish, but like, are you going to let it grow bigger or not? Are you going to own up? It's just a general, personality trait that people have, or in a way the society works. It kind of comes back to, people and how you hack their minds. So how you get them to click on something. Somebody's actually thought about this on the other side. And again, that's why training is probably your only defense. You've got to try and make your own people more skilled. It's great if you've got some piece of software running on there. It goes like, oh, you try to run this exe file like out of your email. It's like you really should not be doing that. I don't care who you are, you shouldn't be doing that. It's just silly. I just want to talk about spear phishing quickly. So, which I'm pretty sure brings us to, there we go. So it's basically targeting. So you basically have a target, and then you're phishing for that target. So you're gathering details on that person ahead of time. And any ideas on detecting or preventing this? I've kind of heard some of the answers already.
Well, back to Haroon and those guys, they have a product that's called Fish5, and that should fish your employees as an awareness tool.
Yeah. So that's again on the trading side of things.
Yeah, it's quite good with those stats and very legit.
Right, because when you can embed HTML and that's how Server and these guys do it. They get stats. Show remote content in this.
So who's signing their companies up for that?
So DKIM potentially can help with that.
Yep.
And Spam House and a whole bunch of services. That's just like blanket taking away 80% of the shit that's going to go through the email server anyway.
Yeah. So basically what you're talking about is filtering out the emails that are coming through based on certain criteria. I know what DKIM is. It's domain keys, identity management, as I recall. Something along acronym. Second?
There's one more thing I can't remember what it's called.
Domain keys.
SPF?
Yeah, SPF.
So SPF is Sender Protection Framework. So you basically say, these are my mail servers, and only these servers will send email. So if it comes from a different mail server.
You can get some of these things so tightened up that clients can't send an email because we have a tradition over here of fully configured classes, or you basically your domain is behind some ISP. Like the destination goes home. That's not legitimate, even though it is legitimate.
Yeah.
When you get a client on your back page, what the hell's going on? How come we can't send
Well, I would counter that point. There is a thing called competence, and it can be used to configure mail service correctly.
What's that?
There's something called competence, and it can be used to configure mail service properly. Yeah. And I say that having done this, so just it can be done, promise you.
As much as you might not trust Google, it's something like Google perhaps are using their mail servers. They have years of experience doing that, so you tend to not get all the crap in the mail.
But I mean, I've also found that if you just go there and configure SPF properly and you publish the records, DNS, it works. And if you have, I'll get you a sec. And well, I'm just talking about the same topic, so you won't lose your point. And you also have something like DMARC, and then you can so you have SPF, and these are our mail servers, and you also have DKIM, and DKIM will say like if you have authenticated to the mail server, then it gets the nice little stamp on it to say like yes, this email is sent. Even if you were not on the premises, which like for example you're at home and it doesn't have the right IP address, which the SPF records, and you can configure DMARC to say, well, if it's this one or this one, so if the guy's authenticated himself before sending email, then it's one of our guys. Like, yes, it is, because he's used his username and his password, which will have to be valid in order to send the email. Or he's sitting on our premises in our offices and sending the email, like the print server or the printer, which emails you like the scan or something like that. And maybe can't be set up to have its own accounts. And either or, and you basically go through a process of setting it up and reporting first, and it tells you how many get rejected, and you go see who's rejecting them. It's quite a fairly long process, but you can tweak it and get it really, really nice. So you want to say?
Outsource it to ISPs and how to manage the services. You shouldn't be touching elsewhere or another state.
You're raising a good point.
Yeah. So just use Microsoft for your cloud.
Yeah, but you can't always do that. Sometimes and then still people at Microsoft can actually say your data will not be put outside of something. There are some companies that will not.
Well, then you must cough up and hire a good mail admin.
Yeah.
But it's the thing, it's like do it or don't do it. It's like halfway.
Like if you're big enough to have an SLA agreement with your IT, like you should be working on that so that that ability is not blocked. Then like you don't worry about this problem.
So it's basically a contractual solution to a problem. Like if you don't have the skills in-house, contract it out to somebody else. And you also get like hosted services, which are international, and then you'll get like professional services companies in the same country that you can outsource to. So it's good ideas. It's just thinking about it, right?
You do have systems that generating emails. For them internally, no problem. But we've got external vendors who know that it reports, and they need to receive some of these reports so they can make changes. I mean, this is what issues of block email. And I poked around, there's an open mail server, good for it. If I can work it out in a few minutes, anyone else will do it.
And also, if you're sending stuff to China, and the way one that works, it doesn't, for no obvious reason. I'm just trying to explain that to the Chinese why their emails not going to the globe. The wall gets cut down.
Shame. Don't talk about walls to the Chinese. They'll enjoy that. One of my favorite topics, kind of back to the people again. So if I convince you I'm legitimate, so you get a phone call and it's like, hey, this guy is from Microsoft, one of those companies. And I start telling you things which I know to be true, as in I already know these things, and I'm telling you, hey, can you check this for me? Like our report shows that this is a problem, and wow, it is, or whatever. Or I say, hey, hi, so and so. I just want to check you're in such and such department. I know you're in such and such department before I phone you. I'm not going to ask questions. And once I've told you like where you work, what your job title is, and I've confirmed your phone number, which I know because I've just phoned it, for example. I've confirmed a whole lot of details. You start to trust me. Like, well, this must be Bob from Joburg or head office or whatever, and he's just auditing, to make sure that he's got the right details for it. And then, then you get a call from Jim. Bob says, oh, Jim might phone you. Jim phones you. Jim's auditing the IT side of things. Hi, can you fire something up for us? Can you disable the firewall? Can you? It happens. How would I start, or how would anybody start this process of convincing you that I'm legitimate or they're legitimate when they're not? Where do they get this first bit of information? Like, tell you things that they know to be true. Like, where do they start learning those things?
Directories.
Sorry, directories, isn't
Start
it?
directories.
Yeah.
Or
The other one?
yeah.
There we go. Social media, LinkedIn.
Knowing somebody at the company.
So human networks.
Sales department.
There we go. Well, that's the soft point of entry, right? But
Mm.
Can mobile applications get access to the numbers stored on the SIM card? Like Android or
If your
It really
device is
depends.
compromised, or if you allow permissions for that
Well,
device.
your Google account
Yeah.
sends off the SIM card into the Google account allows access.
But at the same time, you could also install an app that could request permissions to read your contact details,
Yeah.
and you just blindly accept that. So,
how do you actually use that stuff?
so
now we're getting way off topic.
So
We'll get to those ones in a bit. No, we'll get to specifically mobile
Just
stuff.
to go back to that, I mean, if you look at OTR, OTR off the record, right?
Yeah.
Encryption, you can start a encrypted channel with someone else, but until you have either asked the other person a question that only they will know, or you scan the QR code from their side, which means you actually have to be physically in the same space.
Yeah.
It is not verified. And that should be like OPSEC until you cannot verify that it's the other person or that the channel is secure. It's not secure.
That's a great philosophical question. You spread out about
But I mean, like,
you really
like
don't
even
need that anybody is anyone.
I mean, it's the same thing with.
And I'm not going to answer that too. It's beyond the scope of this discussion.
An email that says it's the CEO asking for the last 6 months' financial reports, and it's not the time for him to be asking for that, or from his personal email, or, then rather ask the question.
Well, I wouldn't be that worried about financial reports because they become published information. But if he's asking for you to do a transfer, then yes, like maybe ask some questions like, I've never heard of this department, or I never knew we had such a supplier, and like, why is the first time I'm hearing it over an email? Like, pick up the phone and phone the CEO.
Yeah.
Just what I would do. But,
Well, you can also thread them by saying, they might say, I see you running Windows. You say, well, actually, I'm not running Windows.
Yeah.
And then you'll soon find out whether they're legitimate. Logging into somebody and the guy started swearing at me over the phone. Very quickly.
I prefer to keep them going. Like, hang on, my computer's slow. Let me go turn it on. Put the phone down. Go do something else.
you just
Well,
always
it's much
have.
more interesting if you engage in the conversation.
Well, you've got to walk back after you've made your breakfast. Then you like, yeah, hang on. Okay, I'm going to log in now. Yeah, it's just really slow. And then you go get dressed. And by the time you're done, you wasted a good half an hour of his time. That, I think, is probably the most effective way to try and tip that balance of that profitability base.
Make sure you've always got a Windows VM at the ready.
No. There's a video on YouTube where the guy has a Kali Linux or something distribution, Flash boots it up, lets the guy team view into that until he realizes it's not Microsoft.
Coming to your point, maybe you're relying on knowing the other person. For example, today, first time I interacted with and we always use Slack. That's just a username and a picture.
not even encrypted, it's in graphic.
So
How would I
So maybe I think we should start thinking slightly like intelligence communities. They have information right. So the higher you go up the chain, the higher your access level has to be. If you're not on the access level, you should not have access to the information. To verify someone's look, Slack is an awkward thing because we're all at work chatting on Slack, a public communications channel as a service. So it's difficult to say.
If you company well,
yeah. So like it's difficult. Like
it's not. I'm sorry, it's not.
Office, it's
if I ask you for your bank account details, are you going to give them to me when I ask you on Slack?
Well,
good man.
What about Steve asking me for information on analytics and the bug report?
But see, the interesting thing is sometimes that it's difficult.
Send him the bug number, which he can access using his own account to the bug system.
Yeah, that's what I was.
So like you break.
I actually got asked.
You break the channel.
I got asked by someone else. Sorry. This crappy test link app, you just forward me the actual test cases. So if that's the word, so this is what someone would have requested me to do.
So before Slack and Skype, how did people communicate in Office?
Email?
Or verbally.
Verbally.
So you could verify by actually going to the person if you're unsure.
Yeah, I know I could, but how many people could do that?
But again, like, is it a test case? Ooh, yes, when we ran this test, this feature didn't work. What did work?
Yeah.
It's not secret, dude. It's really not secret.
What about bugs? Like vulnerabilities? If this stuff actually gets released, it's not seen as unresolved.
Yeah, slightly more, but you're going to release that software. Somebody can go look for those bugs themselves. And again, there's bugs and there's bugs, right? You know, like, oh, there's a critical authentication bug. Hopefully we would not release that piece of software.
My actual example, just think about the other.
So what we're doing here, I'm not actually picking on you.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, you kind of got to make your mind up and think about it and apply your mind. And it's like, I don't hand out my bank details. I don't hand out like passport details. I don't hand out a lot of details. I don't care who you are. I don't care what mechanism. I don't care if you're standing in front of me. Like, and not you, anybody. It's like, you should hear the conversations I have when the bank phones me. It's like, or my insurance phones me. It's like, so would you care to give me some of the details which you should have if you know who I am? And I ask them questions like, why not? And in other countries around the world, privacy is a very big thing, and people get upset when companies.
How do I know you DA?
Or ID number. But like if your insurance company phones you, like, oh, I just want to confirm that it is you, or your credit card company phones you, they want you to tell them, you know, your ID number. Like, well, you know, I don't know, where's the harm in that? No, I'm sorry. Who are you? Prove to me that you are my insurance company or my, you know, my credit card company first. Like, why just give out information on the phone because somebody phoned you? It's like, I don't even know the phone number. It's a call center.
What kind of reactions do you get?
I'm polite about it.
Yeah.
So I've never, and I am the customer if they're legit. So generally, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very good. I mean, I got a phone like yesterday. He said, you know, you can't want to one's company. This. But I didn't give her any information. I phoned the homeowner's head office and said, do you know this person? Okay, I'll phone you back.
Yeah.
Because if they phone you, you have no idea who they are. If you phone them, you can look up the number and say, okay, I know this is your contact. But yeah, I've never had anybody upset.
No.
Because
And if somebody comes to your front door and says they're from Eskom and they need to check the wiring out, how do you know they're from Eskom, first of all? Or how do you know they're actually a police officer?
So when
Phone the police station with the badge number. Hi, did you send Constable so-and-so around? Yes, we did send Constable. Like, you've looked up the phone number in the phone book, unless they've compromised the phone book before you got it. Like, there are only so many like steps they can do to get around your security. Like,
when they get irate and stuff.
So when coffee actually
you don't open the door, check first. Get irate outside.
When coffee actually comes into the door, then the company is at fault most of the time. So you can ask questions like that. You know, it's law now. Well, when it actually gets into the
If you guys want to know more about social engineering, by the way, there's some, DEF CON's just done a whole bunch of social engineering competitions. They do it every year.
Ask the person who got shaved and mohawk, potentially at the social engineering building.
Yeah, there's a couple of heads that here have been shaved, so try not to look in any one particular direction.
Can I just throw something back in there?
Yeah.
Because you were saying about that thing.
No, not that thing. You've got to be a little more specific.
You're probably going to think I'm mad and shoot me down and whatever, but I'm going to say this anyway. There's
Please
one thing that I like what you said, which is about being polite.
Yeah.
It's very, very true. But the other thing about those people who ring me up and say, you've got a Windows system and stuff, and they try getting this information. There is two ways of doing it. There is the long-winded one, and then there's the other way of actually engaging in a conversation with
Yeah.
Now, it's rather back to front this one, and possibly it might not get anywhere. But the aim of what you're trying to do, I mean, it's not for everyone, is to actually develop a conscience of the person on the other side. Because on that particular, what I didn't say to you in that conversation about Anna was that it turned out the guy was working for a very abusive person, and the guy was really bullying him. And the conversation that I had with him actually, I think, was instrumental in helping him to think his way through getting out of that disgusting situation. Because most of what these people that phone you up are, they're not like high-level people, they're just runs, but they're treated like shit. And if they don't treat you stupid, they're out. And then they've got no money, they've got families to feed.
Yep.
So they're not just like random, like scumbags.
I would agree with you.
You must remember. I think we need to we need to kind of like have that in the back of our mind from the beginning.
Yeah, it's good. I'm not going to argue against that. It's an interesting perspective. You've got the time, and you can try and help somebody. Being compassionate to somebody is one thing, and by being compassionate, we obviously do not mean letting them take advantage of you, because that's not the same thing by a long stretch of the imagination. So yeah, making somebody think, maybe making them wonder if they can get a better job doing something that's actual value, contributing to the world, rather than just trying to basically steal some money or extort some money from something. So. Real world examples as well. Some of the guys at DEF CON were doing things like you get the phone records or the lease records of a company, and you're like, oh, okay, so these are headquarters. Next thing you're phoning, and because on the lease it's public records, filed with the county or whatever in the US. And oh look, it's got the leasing manager and their title and their phone number, and oh look, their office address, etc., and like the size of the building. So just with that kind of information, they start to build up plausible. This person seems to know what they're doing, and they seem to have the facts on them, and they know where we are and what the phone numbers are in the apartments, and their phone number looks right because they spoofed that. So public information is not is not in any way an acceptable means of gauging somebody's authenticity. If somebody's telling you they're the CEO of the company and they're getting hold of whatever the marketing manager, or probably not the marketing manager, the finance manager, if you can go on the website of the company and see that's the CEO's name, well, that wasn't hard to figure out. If you can look on LinkedIn and the first result for finance manager is other person's name, well then figuring out that other person is the finance manager is not hard. So when the CEO then is talking to the finance manager, it means nothing, right? It's publicly available information. So kind of interesting when you think about the investor section on a website or LinkedIn, and how much information is out there for people to see. So this is hacking. I put /pen testing. We might have a pen tester or two in the room. Not seeing the usual suspects today. Basically making it difficult, detecting it, preventing it. Any thoughts?
So we had a pen test in our organisation recently, and we don't have some of the nicest systems for monitoring, and most of my checks are manual, but we picked up in the day. I didn't specifically know it's there, and these guys are actually doing very simple things and very simple
It's like, I'm hearing like, do the basics right, and it's going to get you a long way. Like, it's almost like the low-hanging fruit.
At least 80%, the basics will cover 80%. This guy was not doing advanced stuff. If we had proper systems in place for monitoring, we would have been on it quicker.
Batch process.
Yep,
Batch
batch.
process.
Like the amount of times that pen testers would tell you, oh, I had an easy day, they had shell shock.
That's old already for anybody. That's it. I'm just saying that's quite old for anybody who doesn't
Well, it's
follow.
not just quite old, it's like, oh cool, I've got to remotely.
One step.
And I mean, we're talking about like a patch, right?
Yep.
Well, we're not talking about upgrading the whole system.
Or even shelling out a lot of money, right? Maybe downtime costs you money, but if your system's unpatchable, then you've got bigger problems because, wow, what happens when it breaks? But yeah, so making it a little bit difficult cuts out a lot of people, who could attack you. I would say that there are very, very determined individuals or organizations or governments out there. If they want to get in, they will get in. Somebody puts a gun to my head, I'm going to listen to what they're saying without arguing. Denial of service. Seeing quite a bit of this going on. Don't really do too much on this. I think I can talk without the points anyway. So just remember to update the slide later for you guys. And anyway, so if you distribute things a lot, then a little bit of load, a little bit of load, a little bit of load, little requests. That's a way to overwhelm, one single point, like whether it's a website. You can go slightly more advanced. You can do like a bit of a backscatter or an amplification or reflection, kind of a lot of similar words used to describe the attack. You start spoofing their IP address and you say like, hi, please send me the time. And you start talking to a lot of NTP servers. And you can do the same thing with DNS and say, hey, can you send me some like these DNS records? And some of the security ones are quite big. And you ask a whole lot of DNS servers. And eventually, you've got a whole bunch of network time protocol servers sending the time. You've got a whole bunch of DNS servers sending the time. You don't even have to generate the load which will swamp that site or that business. Somebody else can do it for you. You request that this happens. That happens. Yeah, phone your ISP would be one of my bits of advice because it's literally a load issue. You cannot fit any more bits down your internet connection, then that's it. Like, it's not like you can filter them out in your firewall. That's not the problem. And it's not like too much traffic coming into your network. It's your pipe to your network to the outside world is now. It's clogged. So one step up on the ISP side.
Dealt with a huge amount of service into spam us, and they reach 300 gigabits per second. The problem is switches. A single port takes as a gigabit switch. Like, you can't pass any more down that, so you have to distribute it. And eventually they had to resegment the whole network after that attack because they realized that the more we separate what we have, the more we distribute it, the more we can handle what we're up against. And then another interesting video that came out of Black Hat recently is that using JavaScript and browsers, you don't need DNS or MTP servers. If you can get enough users with basic JavaScript running in the browsers, visiting a site or even looking at an ad on the site, just tag enough of them over and over and you can bring down the site. But also redirecting it. There's something about a redirection, visiting a site and then redirecting the traffic.
Cool. So it's good to think about these things, right? You never thought about them, and then you have to have a conversation with your company on what you need to do. Then it's going to be quite a bit tricky. That's why I like to ask a lot of questions. So how many people have these things floating around now? What is this, by the way? Like, in general terms, don't tell me it's a phone, please. So, it is, yeah, most of them do contain tracking devices these days. And
my next computer with too many features.
here we go. It is a computer. It's obviously networked as well. It's got radios in it, so it's wireless networking.
People that say life.
That's, yeah, but we're getting back to the philosophical. Like how do you really know who anybody is outside the bounds of this discussion? Afterwards, with more beer, maybe we can try it. But anyway, but if you think about like some of the problems that you can have with these things, especially like when it becomes a corporate type of, oh, we support this, and it's a BlackBerry, and the guy's got his mail on it, or it's an iPhone, and the guy's got his mail on it, or it's anything, and he's got his mail on Android, etc. Or can access the intranet on it because you can join it onto the Wi-Fi, and you can end up with files on there. The guy's like, oh, let me just Dropbox, and suddenly there's a copy of the files from his computer on there, and it gets lost, or it gets malware, and it's like, okay, so clearly there's some impact to bad things happening to the cell phones now, the smartphones. I've got dodgy or untrusted downloads, installing this APK from random site. There we go. That's a very big thing.
No. I mean, there was an APK that was hacked that went around that people installed because they thought it was legitimate. That requested a lot more permissions than the standard APK does by Niantic.
And yeah, it was basically people with really bad Google who
Exactly.
you go to a site that is hosting examples of malware. Like you download that version of Pokemon APK.
No, because the
you
funny,
may have malware. At that
exactly,
point.
because the
It's
funny
strange.
thing is, you Google the Pokemon APK and literally the first site comes up is legitimate.
Yeah.
Anything else you shouldn't trust.
Yeah, I'm not sure I trust the first one either, but
There was a story a couple of years ago of a legitimate company that they had their killer app came popular, bought out by a illegitimate company, substituted their app in there.
that happens quite a bit actually.
That recently happened to the Android app called, I think, ES File Explorer or something. Cheetah Mobile bought them up and basically just flooded the app with adverts and things like that in like the span of a week.
Well, this is the same issue with the Internet of Things right now. Is most Android, iOS, whatever apps are just a front end for a API. So someone buys that domain, your request is still going out.
Yeah, it's not the traditional underlying things, the domain name, the release expired, and someone else just looks it up and there we go, sweet.
There's some very, very interesting attacks on domain names, and specifically things where servers are running a bit hot and flipping bits, and they work out one or two like ASCII characters up and down and what that'll mean, and yeah, some very interesting stuff if you go look. Yeah, well, the computer will accidentally access that when that bit flips. So nobody even has to mistype it. You know that that computer's on the edge there, and temperature, and it's whether that's a 0 or a 1 now. Sometimes becomes a little more dodgy than permissions requested by the apps you were mentioning earlier. Like, oh, this application wants access to all my contacts. Like, why does my photo gallery need all my contacts? No. Outdated apps, because any application can have flaws in it, bugs in it, including security flaws. This is a bit more about people phishing, requesting for credentials, personal identification. If you get an email or push notification, like, is legit, like stop and think kind of thing. Buggy mobile browsers, it's pretty much the same as what I said here. It's got a flaw, and you're using that browser to go and visit websites. It's not going to help.
So, like, basically, the more software you use across devices, the more you're putting yourself at risk.
Well, you just, in a slightly more technical or to sound fancier way of putting that is, the greater the attack surface, the more likely.
Exactly.
Yeah. But again, it's also a function of, is it up to date? Because, for example, there's the next one, like outdated, unpatched OSs. So
No, fair.
if you're keeping that up to date, you're keeping the browser up to date, if everything's up to date and patched, which comes back to patching, that helps a lot, right?
Fair enough. But what I'm
Sorry, say again?
The whole Android phone thing is a mess. Because the problem is it requires the phone manufacturers to push out the updates. The phone manufacturers don't do the updates. So a whole lot of
broken devices out there just waiting to be used on places that I mean, people like that. This is not a problem. This is existing for the past couple of years.
That's actually a Google issue.
Yeah.
Because
It's the way they license
still,
Android.
they will still have some kind of SLA with Google by using it to have access to all the tools and build processes and stuff. But there is no, you need to stay up to date, you have to support these kernels. So it's a difficult thing to solve, but what you can do, for instance, if you look at WhatsApp, over time they've improved a lot of their security. I won't say they're perfect, but the fact that their databases that you restore when you move the files to another phone is in a .crypt 12 or whatever format. So that needs to do stuff like, I mean, some apps will find Android with de facto standard SQLite on the local file storage, and then will store in SQLite in plain text a credit card CCP or something like that. I mean, just at least encrypting it on this and using SSL, you know, you're really winning there.
Yep. And I reckon jailbroken devices are also bad for some reason.
They are.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like with the WhatsApp example, if you can jailbreak your device, you can get WhatsApp's ID on your specific device and then decrypt the messages that you backed up. So jailbroken devices are a security risk to people who aren't jailbreaking their devices that know what they're doing. You know what I'm saying?
So I like the way you put a bit of a disclaimer on the end there. Like,
if you don't know what you're doing, then it's a problem.
If you don't know what you're doing in life, a lot of things become a problem.
Okay, that's also, we're getting philosophical again.
Yes.
So any rooted device, because you can't apply something like SE Linux or any fine-grained, you know, access control if everything's rooted.
Yeah.
Yep. It's true.
What is the copyright name? Is that the
So
on top of Android section? It's going to hard Android. What things called copyright domains?
not familiar. Drawing a blank. So a couple of things to do. This obviously doesn't apply to jailbroken devices for all reasons just mentioned. Like we all headed like 1, 2, 3 there. So access control, biometrics, so fingerprint scanners, for example, on some of these phones and things like that. It's actually kind of cool. Some guy takes your finger off. Encrypting on the device. You know, if that device is going to get lost, or you know, like there we go, and somebody steals it, then those files that are on there at least are not usable for somebody. So if you're actually worried about confidential or proprietary company information, then encrypting is a good idea. If for some reason those files were only on the device, then having a backup would be very useful as well at that point. Being able to remotely find the device, it was mentioned that they've got tracking devices in them, so this is actually kind of useful. I'll tell a little story about before smartphones had GPS in them, how to find them. It involves working for a telco though, so a bit more interesting. Regular upgrading. So if you go to the latest version of, for example, Android, it's got a whole bunch more features like more fine-grained access control as well. You can deny permissions to apps that ask for it. I routinely deny things. I'm like, no, you don't need that. And magically, the app still works just fine. So
but at the end of the day, you're again trusting that Google implemented that correctly.
It's like I trust that VW's brakes work.
Yeah.
Dude, it's not get philosophical. Yeah. Yep. Ask those people who drove Toyotas and like the brakes didn't work. Life's full of risks, but we try and we try and manage the risks in our lives, and I think that's where a lot of this talk is coming from. They say don't jailbreak devices, and you were just mentioning why it's hard to lock down devices if they're jailbroken. Same point. This is almost like the flip side now. I'm going to just argue against myself. Your point was that if the device is unsupported and there's no, like, well, what do? How do you download like a new version of the manufacturer isn't providing it? So if you jailbreak your device and go and find something like the open source version which has been rebuilt by the community for your specific device, then you can actually get back onto the supported train, or a train of patches and things.
That's true, but you could also be introducing things that are like flaws or bugs that the community doesn't know about in their implementation of it.
question is.
So it's about, do you trust the
The old bugs or the new bugs?
How
basically?
bad are the new bugs relative to what's been fixed already on your device?
So basically, how stable is CyanogenMod, how stable or
Yeah, how stable is that versus your stock implementation that might be 2 years old? And how bad was Stagefright or whatever that bug was that was on Android with the SMS or MMS thing? Was it Stagefright? Yeah. Yeah. So is my thing vulnerable to that? Because not every device, even if it's supported by a third-party manufacturer and this bug is known to be vulnerable, or Android 4.1.1 is vulnerable, you might have a 4.1.1 device by Samsung, which isn't vulnerable because they may have patched it or something, you know. Like, the problem is this inconsistency.
I think we're coming down to ifs and buts, pots and pans, we call the battleship, right? Pay attention to permissions requested by the app. You don't have to give every permission to do everything, especially when you know it doesn't need it. Updating apps, kind of obvious. If you think your password's been compromised for Google Apps or Google Play or Apple IE, then change it. I mentioned, like, if you're getting these emails asking for your password or credentials, like if you're not expecting it, then question it. It's a little obvious, really. If it's unpatched, be careful, and basically apply patches and use management tools. So finally, we get to credit card fraud, which people are asking for. So the problem with credit cards. So who actually pays for fraud when there's credit card fraud?
With credit card insurance, basically by having credit cards, if it's mediated by yourself, prove that you would do the transaction, the credit card insurance pays for it.
Yep. So the issuer being the issuing bank?
Yes.
Yeah. Because obviously there's the issuing bank, there's the credit card company, there's the person who signs up for it, and there's also the person who accepts credit cards, i.e. the merchant, who
Acquiring channel that provides access to.
There we go. So there's at least 5 parties, or was it 6 that we get up to?
Include yourself, yes.
Yeah. So quite a few parties. Obviously, if the card is present, so it does depend on your contract. Like if your card is actually physically stolen and you don't report it, I think you can start getting into the point where you have to start paying for it. I've never had that happen to me. I've had the people start using my credit card in Japan and stuff while I'm sitting here looking at my credit card and going like, yeah, that's not me, dude. On the phone, like, no, I'm looking at, have you still got your card? Yes, I'm looking at it. Like, tear it up and send a photograph or scan it and send it to the company, and they're like, yeah, you're not paying for any of that then. Good. The person who would then get nailed in that case, if it really depends on what point the system, well, the workflow, I suppose, process, would be, I think it was Superbalist.com was one of the places they were like buying things from, and they would lose the money if they were accepting that credit card, because they clearly did not have the actual credit card, because I had it in my possession. It's like, this card not present. And some company in Japan, etc. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, in this case, it was done on a Friday afternoon, and I picked it up on Saturday morning by chance. I wanted to pay my credit card, so I looked online and like, oh, I don't recognize Tenso Japan and Superb or like what? This was a few years back. And okay, phone the company, the credit card company, and hey, there's a problem here. At that point, I would start to wonder if they've actually shipped the goods. So maybe they weren't actually out of pocket. They might have had to give the money back, but they hadn't lost anything. So, how does credit card fraud get detected? Anyway. Yep. So reviewing bank statements or credit card statements.
Giving you SMS as soon as you pay for something.
There we go.
They also use their own sort of intelligence to say, okay, I mean, I've been phoned when I've been buying things, traveling, and they'll just deny it sometimes. But they think it's out of the ordinary. If you haven't said I'm going to be traveling here, and even if you have said you're going to be traveling here, you might still phone the retailer and say, I'm not going to put this through until you validate it.
Yeah. Do an ID check, please.
Yeah.
You whip out your passport because you're overseas and you've got that with you, and they're like, yeah, okay, no, it's fine. Go through.
South Africa, when I lived in
No, you do know, yeah.
Is it a new thing?
No,
So it's
I've
everywhere.
I've done it for a long time.
When I went to Italy, I was surprised to discover like a new bank
You got your form, they will let you use it sometimes, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah. So I'm in favour of actually telling my bank that I'm going to be overseas between this time and this time in this country. I don't like giving out information, but I already have a kind of close relationship with the bank because they've got my money and right. So yeah, but there's a good purpose. It means I don't get stranded with a credit card that stops working because they've decided it's fraud. So I'm basically just increasing the amount of transparency between me and banks so they know that this is good activity or far more likely, and that's the reason I would do that.
And also what's quite nice is some of the banks, when you buy your airline ticket with your credit card and they trade with travel insurance, they already know you're going overseas unless you tell them it's not for yourself.
Yeah.
So they can link up the system. So they have systems that monitor activity during periods. Fraud detection is an active thing, so they actually it's like, think of it as an IDS.
Yep.
Before it reaches the actual core banking system, it actually transactions get funneled through that. They do spend patterns, they look at activity, typical use and so forth. And they build up what they call a credit profile and a spend profile. And they weight it accordingly, and then if something looks weird, they will flag it.
But also partly because if they sell your credit card details in batches, they sell it with your postal code, because then they end up buying stuff from the e-commerce site in your area as do not flag it as suspicious. But if you then are out of the country and they still end up buying stuff in Cape Town, it's just going to get blocked.
I've also noticed that more websites are supermarkets are very interested in where you go to pay for something and it basically insists on sending a one-time pin to your phone and you can type in, which I think is amazing. I'm sure it can be hacked, but it's much better than
It's very confusing. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
When you go pay the bank website and show you bank logo and they go down.
Which has stars in the password for a one-time password. It just bothers me. It's a one-time password, just put it on the screen, whatever.
It's very secure. Netbank's quite nice with that, where they actually push the USSD push to your phone. So actually on the USSD channel you can actually accept it. You don't do it at the time, it actually then swaps over to the SMS from the number you can type it in. That's actually the best way, because I think recently the NIST issued a best practice update saying that one-time passwords via SMS is no longer considered secure because of the fact that numbers are portable. You don't know if those numbers can be pushed into virtual services when people get intercepted.
Well, the worrying thing is that whole SIM swap is
Yeah, but
They
very, very well.
very effective.
So in our case, like a SIM swap would affect the USSD as well.
Correct.
So it's about as secure as the SMS would have been.
Also, it's
They
clear
have
that
cases, your phone stops working, like, would you like, and then all the stuff happens during that time frame.
So they should be aware.
But apparently it's much harder on contracts. So if you've got like a pay as you go, it's much easier to do.
Yeah.
Business model.
Yeah. Which is ridiculous.
Should be the same across everything.
Exactly.
Equally easy to steal money, right? So basically we've managed to cover OTPs, yeah. I don't know if you've got the pins there, like on the actual physical terminal when you're typing in your pin. It's kind of useful. Talking to the little chip on the side there. Yep. Disposable credit cards. It's quite cool. You can buy a credit card, you can get a virtual credit card number, and you can pre-charge whatever, when I say pre-charge, like load it up with money, and you can then spend that. So if you know that the bill is going to be 1,200 Rand, you can generate a credit card which is like, it's basically only valid for a very short amount of time. You load 1,200 Rand on there. You can do your online purchase with 1,200 Rand on that credit card number, which is not your normal credit card. And voila, like if somebody wants to try and use that again, they can. There's no funds on it, it's no longer valid. It's pretty secure actually.
That's the way they have those sort of they have those cards so you can use them to buy stuff from companies that might allow you to buy stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of stuff like in the States that if you try and buy over here, they just will not let you do it because you're not American citizen. So you get one of those world's credit cards, so you pay a fee, charge it up, and then you can use it.
Like if you want to download stuff from America, so
So point-to-point encryption, it's not really for you or I in terms of our benefit directly at least, that it's going to improve security, but you know a lot about this. And basically what you're going to do is, well, this way, it's better than end-to-end encryption. And the reason is that the merchant never knows the details. So I put my credit card, or I give them the credit card into the machine there and give my PIN number, and it establishes a connection from the terminal through to the issuer or the switch.
Yeah, so it's the TCP or the third-party processor, so the intermediary.
Yeah.
So basically, if you look at point-to-point from a PCI DSS point of view, so it's a separate standard from the normal PCI DSS because it's much stricter. This way, point-to-point encryption requires quite a lot of points in the chain to be secure. It actually starts from the manufacturing of that terminal, that credit card machine, from key loading that's done, injection of the keys into it, and how it's distributed throughout the chain. So what they do is actually, in some cases, the manufacturers generate a hardware secure module, similar to most hardware secure modules that's tamper-proof, etc., and then they embed that in a cryptographic package, whatever, and they put that in the terminal. These things are moved to a what they call key loading center. So this is even before the card is being, or the terminal is being distributed to the banks, or maybe it's done on instruction by the banks, but the bank doesn't even see it. Then that terminal is directly moved to the, let's say, the merchant, the retailer. So at that point, that's the entry point in this whole chain. Coming back all the way to where the banks are and stuff. The banks technically don't really see that point of sale as part of their infrastructure. If, let's say, a big retailer, whatever, has an acquiring leg, so in South Africa we've got a three-part model where you have your merchant acquirer and your issuer. The end user needs to pay for that transaction. They've got a card that's got a chip on it and a PIN. And the merchants on the PCI is always scrutinized, like who's touching that card? So end-to-end or point-to-point encryption by creating a trust link or a encryption directly at the point where you put the card, you clip it, and nobody sees that transaction until it reaches the actual acquiring or just before the acquiring. So the merchant's out of scope, and most of the time the retailer's completely out of scope as well. Anything in between is encrypted. Then that payload, whatever is encrypted, is decrypted at the acquiring link side. Right? So everything in the channel up to the point where it's moved from, let's say, public domain to the, let's say, more secure way, controlled environment is encrypted. And all traffic up to that point is controlled. So it is, in essence, it's much stronger because to compromise, let's say if there's no point-to-point encryption, is that you just do memory scanning at the point of sale. Yep. Point of sale, memory, track to whatever, you just grab it, all the information. The PIN is a bit more difficult because that's already encrypted, but you just need to track to because then you just scan the card and you just use it for whatever. So what they're doing with this is they're actually preventing memory scanning because that's, if you remember, there's a malware called Dexter and stuff they found that does in-memory scanning and it just grabs everything and they look for track to. So the point-to-point encryption is literally at where you dip that terminal or that PEG into the device. It's the only one that knows the track to. In there, there's a payload encrypts, sends up all the way to the back, and that session is more or less secure. So think of it as PGP between the two devices, talking to the back end and the front. Basically what it's doing. And it's relatively good. I mean, the Americans made a big mistake when they didn't take PTPE because they, with the target breaches and stuff, they just went for EMV without PIN. That doesn't make sense. So there's not even, I mean, even after target with 40 million breaches, they still like, wait, it's too much effort, we're not going to do it. The problem is they've got a fragmented banking system. And South Africa's got a very good banking system where we've got 4 major banks, and these banks got good interchange relationships between each other, and that's why actually our banking system is much more capable of supporting point-to-point and EMV. EMV is actually quite good because with EMV, and I'm probably going to touch on it later with mobile, it's what they call host card emulation. When they talk with NFC chips, when you tap the card. So EMV code, there's a whole host card emulation spectrum where, you know, very interesting if you're suffering from insomnia. But basically what it does is it emulates the chip, and Android actually brought that in KeyCat. They actually brought in host card emulation. So you can actually talk indirectly with the NFC chip in your card using that through your phone, while actually emulate it for you. And then on that chip we call a application, and then an AID, application identifier, and it actually can talk to that application, asking it certain questions. And this is a big chat going between the bank and your credit card. And then it can interrogate it for information, whatever. And point-to-point encryption makes that even more secure. More secure with all the other checks, because it's quite a convoluted system, but it works.
Yeah.
But this actually protects it even further. Because previously the conversation was even clear. If that channel wasn't in SSL or TLS or anything, anybody could sit, especially in memory if it's scanned. But now point-to-point is even a better wrapper on top of it. So if you can use point-to-point, if you're a retailer, use it. It's worth the money, it moves a huge amount of liability off it. Because you don't effectively, you're out of scope for PCI.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Right.
So, one of the key problems that which I managed not to explicitly state, is that if you can read what's on the front of the credit card and the back of the credit card, you've got a problem already. So the credit card is a horrible, horrible system. It's like, oh, you know, a string of numbers, and it, like, you know, the expiry date and the name on the front. And that was the original, and I think that was before they added the CVV on the back. Yep. So that was like the original. Then they added a number on the back. So now you have to turn the card over. Like, there's no ways like the waiter could ever like remember the 3-digit number. But sorry, I'm prone to sarcasm sometimes. And yeah, so now we've got the chip on the front with the pin. So that helps a bit. Of course, if your pin is used, then you're probably liable, right? Because, well, the card is pretty much present. You present putting the number in, or you've told that, you know, or written it on the card, told it to somebody. So the original question that we got about credit cards and, like, you know, can you cover this topic is, what happens when you've put your credit card details into Google Wallet or Apple Pay? And I read up on a few of these, and, you know, we've mentioned a couple of these, like encryption already. So what they do is they take your card details and they encrypt them, and that's a good thing, because they're still storing them somewhere, so, you know, they can be decrypted. But hopefully, for example, let's say Apple, this is the example I read, so they're looking after their encryption keys and not decrypting this stuff. And, you know, if they go and store it offline, that's even better. And you ask yourself, well, how can they store it offline, and don't they need your credit card details to how do you say, process the transaction? Not really, if you're using things like tokenization, which they do, which is even better. So basically, they take your credit card details and run it through a function, and you get a token that represents those details, and that's now the token that gets used. But that's not your credit card details, so if it were to get exposed, it's not that useful, because it's well, often they'll like hash for example, on Apple side of things, they'll take the credit card details and they'll hash them against the device as well. So now that together they work. So if somebody else gets hold of the token without your phone, it's not very useful. So, but your phone, if you're thinking about this a little bit, now becomes the credit card. So they definitely recommend that you put a PIN on there or some sort of access control. So it's pretty secure actually. It's, you know, it's much better than.
All of them, the Apple Pay is probably the most secure because of the fact that they use the Visa tokenization specification, which actually does exactly what you said. The Apple Pay one also uses the secure enclave chip. They've got a secure processor inside it, which is quite good, which connects to your fingerprint reader and stuff. So it's very good. And actually, I think it's the first implementation of the Visa Spectrum on a mobile device that's widely adopted. If you look at others like SnapScan and Zapper, they use the first two elements of the credit card, PAN and the expiration date. That they store locally. Right. Now, in all fairness, that is, if you look at PCI, is what they call cardholder data. This even the CVV is the fact that you say that's even worse because they treat your card as card present, which is more liability. It's just the first two elements that is pretty much public knowledge to a certain degree. Like somebody can just see you, whatever. You're retaking a photo of the thing that you loaded into your wallet using SnapScan and Zapper as well, and with Google Pay, Google Wallet and Apple Pay. So those technologies that I'm discounting Apple now because tokenization works a bit different. It's pretty secure. I mean, like I said, they use the image, they fingerprint the phone, right? They bind through identity to lots of things to the phone, and they bind your credit card to that. And every time a transaction is done, that information passes along with the transaction. So they've got special arrangements also with their acquiring bank, like SnapScan is done through Standard Bank. So Standard Bank monitors that transaction activity. Zapper is international, so they've got other agreements. So these risk profiles are still attached to them. But tokenization is the better way because it never shows the real card. Never. So if you can use tokenization, it's also another step better. But that's especially for one-time payments because what they do is they derive cryptographic PAN and that's what. So everybody probably wonder what Visa stands for. It stands for Vested Interest Sellers Shall Descent.
So kind of like different take on social engineering. And so how many times do you give out your details? It's kind of also like a privacy question. So think about that. Who do you give your
registers
details?
for a service?
So have you considered what happens like you've given out your details to somebody you trust, like a company? What happens if that company is breached? Like external people get in there and, oh look, the company you gave your details to did not know about encryption or tokenization or, wow, now life's going to suck. So it's also why sharing passwords between different websites is a bad idea because it takes one company, let's say a company owns the website, to not know what they're doing, MD5 sum, that's a great algorithm, right? To keep your credentials secure, and suddenly that's everywhere. Insider threat, just disgruntled employee at the company you give your details to. Hey, guess what? They're selling them. Credit card details, or banking details, or whatever details you've given them. Like, are you discarding things? It's not just giving things away. Are you throwing it away? Like, do you throw your statements in the bin? Like your printed statements, do you have a statement emailed to you? Like, do you delete those? Do you keep those? Do you forward them? Like, are they locked with a password? It's just things to think about, right? So online banking, well, breaking online banking, or stealing money through online banking. And it has been done, and it's been in the news again. Previously it used to be with a syndicate, and this is back to the SIM card being cloned. So they're breaking the second factor authentication. So that first of all, they are getting hold of your credentials, your banking details, and then they're breaking the OTP system by either, one is just to clone your SIM card, but they don't even have to clone your SIM card. Because if I wish you, I give you a really nice web page that looks really good, and I say like, hi, enter your details. Like, so you give me your account name, details and your password. I've got those too, and I just need your OTP to log in. So what I do, I take your bank and it says generating OTP, and you get the OTP, and then you enter it into my website. Now I've got the OTP and I give it to the bank. I'm logged in using the details that you've just given me. So you don't need to clone the SIM card. It's just like, it's all about overcoming checks and balances. And if anybody's paying attention to the talk, it's mentioned about processes. So if you have a business process and there are no checks and balances in it, you've got big problems. If you automate that, you've still got big problems. They're just now automatically big problems.
Just a question, I'm
Yeah.
not sure how this works, but with the OTP, so I go into a site, about 500 rands worth of goods, I get a little message saying you've got to pay and spend 500 rand, here's the one-time PIN. Is there any cross-check between the bank that the transaction is actually for 500 rand? Or, like you're saying, if you're going to put a website in front, you're going to take that one-time PIN. Can you actually use that for a different transaction?
No.
So it has to be.
So I mean, I can give you some more details of how they use it. Basically, there's a session going on, right? So it's a live session. I watch if I'm the attacker because I've sent you this email. And you click on it and like, oh look, I know it's this guy. So I start watching it. Like, oh look, you put in your details. And I'm feeding them through in real time. So while oh no, like sorry, wrong time passed. One time PIN was wrong. Right, my website tells you. Except the other website said, no, it's fine. You're in. This one is now I'm adding myself as a beneficiary, right? And then it's like, okay, thank you. That was successful. We're doing like checking your cell phones, right? Can you do one final OTP? Great. Now I get a third one, and there's the transfer. So I'm in. I've added a beneficiary and paid.
So you are getting,
it's
more than
social engineering.
And you've really got to follow it through. So if you're doing online transactions and you get anything suspicious, you just stop.
It's also there's spear phishing, social engineering.
There's a whole combination of things going on there, but it's definitely hacking the person's head that you're dealing with. That you're targeting them.
You still got to pump that person.
There's a man in the middle attack going on. There's all sorts of things going on.
You still need them to be weak enough that they give you some more.
Well, suspicious mind, paranoid.
Yeah.
Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
You pay for something very hard machine that's just trust me you that very best option is a little bit of dysfunction again. For what day?
Yeah.
You don't know that they have on 500 rand their pocket this.
What's that one is suspicious?
But they spend a day doing this, the first day of the job as a cashier, cash out 50 odd thousand rand at the end of the day.
Well, what I found out is at the shop, you don't have to say Checkers or Pick n Pay. You don't have to give them your credit card. What I do, I swivel around the card machine and I put in the credit card, and then I can say yes or no.
Yeah. So I'm always the last one to touch the card when it comes out of the machine. I know it's mine.
Well, I touch the card.
Something like that as well, and they're okay with it. And when you go overseas, they expect you to be the one putting your card in or swiping your card and putting in your PIN. Like the fact that here they take your card from you, and I think they think they're being polite. Meanwhile, it's just really bad security. Don't let go of the card. Come, take it from me. You really want to.
I was denied a My City bus. I was trying to top up my card. Just tell me your PIN. I said no. I'm sending you my PIN number. And I put it in the card machine. It's like, I'm not serving you. Get to the back. There's a long queue. All the other passengers like push me out of the car.
My City card.
Yeah, and those are actual bank cards. They're actual cards with money.
Well, they are preloaded, so there's a limit to the damage.
Yeah, so it was more.
And it is simple.
So I kind of, I walked the distance and played and wrote all these things and stuff. She didn't give me.
Long story short, I probably would have done the same. So I don't blame you. It's really bad if they're asking you to give your PIN. It's like your personal identification number.
There have been a number of complaints. I don't know if they're quite as bad as they were, but there's a whole load of problems with My City Bus payment system altogether, where people were basically being charged twice and given too much.
It sounds more like billing errors.
It was like they would tap the thing and it would say no, the thing hasn't worked. And they tap it again and they discover later that they're actually being charged twice for that.
But that's flawed system design. What were you doing? You caught the bus twice at the same time, the same journey, you pay for it twice? No, logically it doesn't make sense.
You're the one who still has to go to the office to argue with them about the fact that they've taken your money.
I agree with you. second, it's definitely not a second journey, right? Like the bus, you're going to travel that distance once in that time. You could probably even have a 15-minute, like, just cancel the second one, or whatever. It can only be one. So it's...
I use it so infrequently in a month later, type it in, it says, oh, you can charge me. Forgot last time, whatever.
So say a month, that is a long bus. That's a long bus trip. 50 rand sounds pretty cheap.
It sounds like the business numbers are a bit more proportional to this year.
It sounds like there's some serious flaws in the system. I would be pretty upset if it was the system delivered to me.
I know of another case a couple years ago from one of our former large online retailers who also had, they used to get license from their suppliers and, just demonstrate the system, must be all good. And there was an error, a deviation, and the online price, they didn't sell, people were airing it, buying, and overnight they lost a couple of money. So they quickly had to build in the mechanism, the deviations moved by a percentage, red flag, take it off, smile.
It's almost like back to the business practice or business process. If the normal price is X and the sales price is Y and the percentage difference is greater than 50% or 20% or whatever your maximum sale discount is, flag it, prevent it, stop it, require authorization. Like, where's the checks and balances,
It
right?
could be accidental, it could be on purpose. So,
Yeah. But again, override, like, checks and balances. And it comes back to, so you had a manual process that was really flawed, or a business process that was really flawed. Then you automate it. Automating it does not fix the flaws that were inherent in the process. They aren't just automated. Probably heard about a South African bank. Maybe East Asia. Japan. No, Japan, yeah, that's right. Some serious with money withdrawn. Large number of withdrawals using credit cards. So why is this a bad combination? The first four. You can pair them up in twos if it makes it easier. That's a bad combo, that's a bad combo, and then combined is another bad combo.
What's the different time zone?
Yep. So something's going on in Japan, and they're how many hours out from us? 8, 9, somewhere around there. So a good few hours, pretty much a business day. If you time it right, it's going to be sleeping silently. There we go.
Data center location. Did you have something in East Asia to serve some of those requests?
The data center can be away anytime. So I'll
I mean, different laws apply, investigating such things, you might have to involve the police first.
The thing here is also that Japan was not seen as a high-risk source for fraud.
Yeah. We had an interesting chat about this the weekend, and you were saying that because historically it's all been up and up there, or mostly, and not worried about it. So, the people in South Africa who configure the system at a large bank would be like, Japan, it's cool, don't worry about them. Like, as compared to, I don't know, like Albania or
Ukraine.
Ukraine, there we go. Which would be a lot more likely to be flagged. And it's ATM with... Sorry?
These are people on the ground that actually physically people transact.
Yeah. So, Japan, there were clearly a large number of people to pull off this large number of transactions. It's a physical withdrawal of cash, so it did involve a large number of people, the mules. And they're doing credit cards. Now, if you've been debit cards, there's a major difference. How would this have helped? Or why would that have prevented this problem?
Directly to the bank.
So again?
Real time to the bank.
Yep.
There's less third parties involved.
Well, not so much that, but it has to talk to the bank, right? It's a debit card, a savings card. There's a balance, so the credit card, you can...
Yeah, so credit cards got risk profiles attached to them. And because it's an ATM withdrawal, the company, it was 7-Eleven Bank, which is the largest, I think, got the largest ATM fleet in Japan, it's 22,000 ATMs. And what makes them unique is they're open for a long period, where most ATMs in Japan shut off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So when you travel in Japan, make sure you know which ATMs you're withdrawing from because they literally close up. Well, they're doing it in South Africa now as well because they're blowing them up. But so 7-Eleven Bank, the way they work is because it's a credit card, they don't. What they do is they do local standard, and they like in January 2015, dropped the maximum withdrawal limit from 200,000 yen to 100,000 yen. So which is about 9,000 rand at a time that you can withdraw from an ATM, which is quite ridiculous. But what they do is they do standard, which means they take the risk for it because it's a credit card. There's at the back of the track too, when you look at it, this what they call the service restriction code as well, which classifies the card, the PIN in the card does as well. Also, Japan doesn't use EMV, they don't use the chips, so PIN was not necessarily required as well. So the ATM was just like, here's the money, I'll go worry about it later. And also because it was on a Sunday, the rules work a bit different for Forex interchange as well. So there's a lot of things. So these guys knew they knew the system. They knew the system. They knew how to circumvent it. And they hit it within an hour and a half, 2 hours. It was just like, and it was distributed across Japan.
So you want to say the business analyst on the other side was better as the business analyst at the bank?
So the other side being the
organized
crime, right?
So the pen testers actually earned their money.
So there's somewhat related to that. There's an interesting quote. I can't remember who said this, but Dominic from Sense Post tweeted this. There was an article about, I think it was an article about how APTs are starting to look like medium-level pen testers, and often why they are successful and criminal enterprises are they're easily adaptable and they live off the land, where an enterprise is very much structured around the building and what they own and everything. So, I mean, if you need to compromise a server to get to your target, you're going to do it. You're not going to like wait around, okay, I need to talk to the ops team, I need another server, I need this, I need that. In another story, there's a company that's been rebranded somewhat, that's sort of near where Amazon is in Cape Town, and that's as much info as I'll give about it. But I heard the story from a guy who used to work there that they did credit cards in, I think it was Tanzania, Kenya, and I think they were going to go to Nigeria. But they had to use data analysis to actually find how much. So obviously the risk profile in that part of the world was a lot higher. But what they ended up doing is it was such high-risk loans that they lost a lot of money, because often what would happen is it was something like the minimum was around $100 to get a loan for $1,000 US. And then what they did is one guy would go get 1,000, give her 100, get 1,000, give the 900 to 9 different people, who then would give in 100 and get 1,000, and it would continuously multiply. And it's just how it was designed. Yeah, it's just how it's designed. And they also just had people on the ground who continuously went with false identities or real identities and just defaulted on these loans. And I mean, we're talking about in days they were out $2 billion.
The system was a certain 10% deposit.
And I mean,
okay,
like, people,
great, that was easy.
The primary, the largest amount of management that people who knew what was going on were here, not in that country. They might have had some office there.
Cool. So, you survived. Questions? Yep.
Question, taking it back, I think a slide back, where you referred to the African Bank and the whole Japanese issue, right?
Yeah.
Now, what basically, obviously there had to be repercussions within the country as to this has happened and what are we going to prevent this from happening. So what did happen as a consequence?
When you say which country, you mean South Africa? Or
yeah, in a South African context, what was done basically to prevent this from happening? Because
so I don't work for that bank.
No, obviously.
So it's still unfolding. I haven't found all the details. What I
Put it in perspective, sorry if I interject.
Yeah,
Stan Bank has been hit with 700 million rand So which means
I
there was,
also-
there was probably an inside leak as well. Or they managed to find a bin range or a range of card numbers, and they knew that these card numbers were either test cards or some sort of cards, because Standard Bank made a public statement saying it did not affect any customers. It could also mean that Standard Bank is taking the full knock for it. If that's the case, Standard Bank knew about the transactions and did nothing about it.
The banks are notoriously bad at admitting how much money is being stolen from them. Anyway, they won't say anything.
It's because the risk profile is still within.
How did it get out?
No, but the thing is, it's either inside job or not. I mean, there's cases where.
But how did the fact of this get out? The banks don't understand.
You mean the money?
No, how did this mess?
No, because if they got an acceptable risk model and everything that falls inside that model, they just write it against tax. Yeah. I mean, if you look at how much money Standard Bank makes in revenue, this is like not even 1% of that.
It's fine, because at the end of the day, we are the people who pay for it.
Indirectly, because it can affect you if you were linked to that.
No, not even indirectly. You pay for it eventually.
So to answer your question, they are not actually very transparent on how they're dealing with it. They just say they're dealing with it, but they're just dealing with it as part of their natural business processes.
But likely if it happened here, there would be less disclosure. They might have more disclosure levels.
The reason why it was made as public knowledge because the Japanese media picked up on it. Not the local South African. There's a Japanese media, actually it's a Tokyo paper that actually picked it up. Some sort of insider, they had like a snitch inside. They published the information. That's how it became publicized.
One of the people is stealing money out of the bank.
Probably.
It's fine though, because the SABC would have censored it anyway. So.
So right now there's a lot around disclosure. In the cybercrimes bill coming up, there is quite a debate around disclosing it at least to a crisis center or something government controlled to be able to react to a threat like that. But I mean, there will obviously be like at least 72 hours to deal with it, and whether it's confidential or not, or how much they actually have to disclose. So, I mean, for all we know, this happens often. And I mean, the cost of business to just give out like car loans and credit cards to everyone in this country is probably even higher than they would have.
This example is not that much. If you look at the global fraud and credit card in general, this is ATM fraud, which is literally directly cashing out. I mean, just the general credit card fraud is so easy to perform because you don't have to go for high big numbers. You just play low volumes and you just float under the radar. Oracle had to send out last week or this week. They own Micros Fidelio, which is a point of sale system, and they got compromised. They didn't say exactly how, but the speculation that their customer support portal was compromised, which meant that all the Micros Fidelios point of sales systems could update themselves with software of information placed there by other individuals, which means that their Micros point of sales could be locally compromised at the retail. So credit cards are the best place to go after because the risk it's covered. If it was debit cards, people would have a total different discussion.
It's like to give you a little bit more information. It's not about what they're doing, but it is about that this is not the first time this particular attack has happened. It's happened to other banks, for example, in the US. And
Iran?
I heard Iran as well. This was talking to somebody else who works for another big South African bank, which was not targeted, but he was kind of happy to tell me these things that these guys, or this bank is obviously being caught with its pants down by something that's happened before. It's not even the first time this has happened. So they did not choose to put in safeguards for a scheme, a criminal scheme that's been used to successfully get money out of banks before. So that's a bit of a bad sign.
I mean, sorry to interrupt. Another example is that Bangladesh central bank. This is equivalent to South African
Reserve Bank. Yeah.
Reserve Bank, where an insider, I mean, they was almost going to steal $900 million in SWIFT transfer. So SWIFT transfer is similar to, let's say, it's international transfer. It's a protocol they use between interbanks. Now, SWIFT is the only de facto standard to do these electronically by banks. And the only reason why they caught them is because the person that did the transfer spelled, I think, Bangladesh. They spelled the name of the city wrong.
Yeah.
And that's how they caught them out. Because somebody paid attention to that. But to do that, you need to have inside knowledge of how the system.
The transactions already go through.
Yeah, it's like 80 million. 80 million or something.
Yeah, somebody got some serious cash out first.
80 million, yeah. And that's it somewhere in New York.
Yeah. Well, it came from New York and then it disappeared to Singapore.
Somewhere there. And this was all done through the central bank. And this is the central bank. This is the highest bank in that country.
So the Bangladesh Reserve Bank, central bank, had funds on deposit in New York, and somebody was sending please withdraw this money.
Yeah.
So same bank, another story, since the camera's off. Somebody was sitting there and basically copying and pasting credit card numbers into a mail, like the drafts folder, and somebody else was logging in with their details and copying and pasting these credit card numbers out. So that's how batches of credit card numbers disappear out of.
But I mean, surely
one way.
Yeah.
Before Microsoft got told to change Microsoft Exchange, the way it works, enable auditing on the drafts or in progress emails.
Yeah, but surely you have kind of access logs that are being monitored, for example, as you through certain menus or processing whatever. I mean,
they eventually caught this person.
Yeah, because I mean.
So they do find them eventually.
Yeah, because I think that kind of monitoring would be real time, given it's a bank. I mean, we're talking about serious amounts of money here, so.
Well, it's a credit card details, but I mean, if you've got a camera, you start taking photos of things. There's ways and means. They really are. Like, it's up to how inventive the person is. If somebody starts making paper airplanes and throwing them out the window with a credit, these things actually work surprisingly well.
I'm just saying a very nice example that I know about is iRule, which I can level using their 5K level scenario. So, it's a call center. They're capturing credit card details from people on 5G. They actually made rules that would capture, this looks like a credit card number. So what happens? The normal 16 or the normal the American Express or some other that. And it had all these rules. And it would just substitute stars in the middle. So if you had call center agents emailing their friends or on those days in unencrypted chat conversations, it would just packet level change the data on the fly.
Truncate.
That's
quite hectic because if there's checksums in there, it just basically would fail because the checksum doesn't match anymore. But okay, yeah, that's quite hardcore. Well, why not just block it?
Sorry, this is a standard feature on any enterprise firewall, right? Called DLP.
Yes.
I wouldn't say standard, and also it goes back to the people aspect. You've got to have the guys configuring it properly and trained to monitor it properly. I mean,
should be
yes, it should be implemented
properly,
and the technology is available.
Someone that knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
I guess those are standard features, but if you Haroon here, and the things guys say this often, and then the guy from Discovery who leads the InfoSec sectors at ITC, it's often simpler solutions that a bunch of engineers in your company implement. Trump any little box you put in your data center. So, I mean, canary tokens are such a good example of that. Putting a little string in your database, someone goes select all rows from this table. It's a sensitive table. It hits that record. You've got a warning, like removing the credit cards. I mean, regex is not difficult. Like, you can get away with a lot of things. And like the Discovery guy said, they've got a lot of Windows accounts and AD. Send me an email if there's a brand new AD account that was not, done by the IT team, or it's weird or anything. There's a lot of stuff that you can do right now
PCI DSS talk that we had here, but it's about separating the bits and pieces that are actually dealing with the sensitive financial, the payment cards information. So if you can ring fence that and keep it separate, great. If you've got something here that's kind of like, technically they say it's not part of that ring fenced area, that's not actually subject to PCI DSS, but that's controlling the access to that in-scope thing, then it becomes in-scope. That's actually within that thing.
So the thing about some things is they push some of the backup software inside the ring fence and whatnot. Because, it's just, now they're looking at the policy and going, oh, but corporate policy says we need to do X, Y, and Z, and actually right there goes and compromises your PCI. And, this is working within an enterprise is you have these challenges and managers that aren't IT people.
Well, you sometimes get the IT department going, you know what, this is your processes are too complicated, we need to do this, we need to do that. So then somebody does something under the radar and it all goes a bit pear-shaped, or maybe not.
This is the rabbit's warren we've gone down. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so-and-so works for. Any more questions? Otherwise, it's just
we're all here in our private capacities.
Yeah, there we go. The camera's off, by the way, so relax. So I start drinking more.
One other question I'd like to ask is with credit cards, right? So basically, the general over there mentioned the fact that, for example, you can use your RFC-based credit cards to basically emulate the whole chip and pin scenario, which typically happen. But surely, wouldn't that also...
I don't like the whole tap and pay thing. It's like...
Yeah, that's kind of exactly...
Really not. I'd be like, hole punch, clip that out of my card, smash that with a hammer, stick it in the microwave, go use my chip in my card.
That's kind of like where the question was actually leading to. Thanks for actually fast-forwarding the question. As that it's literally what I was going to ask, because I'm thinking now, if I were to just tap something, surely any old topic and Harry can put some other reader.
We'll get Vickers in there, but I would say a couple of things. One, there's normally a limit on those transactions. Is it 200 Rand or it's about that? Yeah, okay. So the other thing is you can actually get shielding now for these things to stop the... It's literally, it's radio waves. It's more like different frequency. Do you know what frequency it is? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's
the normal NFC.
It's NFC, so it's MyFair, Loisters, that type of card. So it's very short.
Yeah.
It's microwave level because you have to power the card. Remember the card, the credit card doesn't have a battery.
Yeah.
That chip needs to get power somewhere to be able to communicate back. So whatever's talking to it is providing the power through the
Induction,
antenna.
right?
It is induction, yeah. So that power is very short range, high microwave power. Not high microwave, but enough for the chip to be able to talk back to it, because it has to have a conversation to say cool, approve. But remember, it's not just stealing. You're not stealing money directly, because the auth has to go. So what they call authorization has to go somewhere. Because just tapping it on that card, if it's not just somebody walks past you and you brush each other and now that guy's taking your money. It doesn't work that way. What happens is you still have to instruct, because remember what a credit card payment is. You're sitting at a retailer, for example. You put in your card, your payment instrument in there. It's got a pseudo alias to your real account, because that PAN, that credit card number, is not your real credit, your real account. It's just an alias handle. You're agreeing to whatever payment instruction is being sent out through that terminal. And normally let's say 100 Rand. Okay, here's my PIN, 100 Rand. Goes off, authentication happens, it's your PIN, and there's money available. Let's just call it that, because it's a credit card. That money has to be paid over from your account into the retailer's account. There's a settlement process that's got to happen there. The settlement process is also not necessarily fast. There's normally a delay on it because it depends. Let's just keep it simple. So you're instructing your bank to pay that back, right? Almost like a check, if you look at it that way. But if somebody just walk past you, brush against you, and steal your money, that money still has to go somewhere. You still have to go online and process it, because somehow value is going to be transferred from your account to his account. There will be a paper trail. Right? So there's where the repudiation part comes in. So it's not going to be just that simple for someone to steal vast sums of money out of your account.
Also, if you want to be really safe about that stuff, you can just buy yourself a wallet that has like a Faraday's cage. Like some kind of tinfoil wrapped around your wallet.
So yes, you can be paranoid about it, but the distances are also quite short. Values are small, and you'll pick it up eventually. Hopefully, they don't walk up and down the whole time past you.
Yeah.
So
there's also the question of follow the money, right?
Yeah.
So the banks can be like, oh,
eventually,
where's this money going? Like when you start like flagging it.
they're servicing convenience stores and forecourts. This is their target market. So for quick payments, you want to fill up 100 Rand petrol, whatever, just go tap the payment, and there you go.